In the two-story house next to the fish pond and the small wooden house on the hill, Li Jiaquan locked up many mentally ill women to sexually abuse and force them into prostitution for money for 7 years. In early July 2003, the police in Maoming City, Guangdong Province brought a couple who fought in the middle of the street to the police station. Thinking that they were lovers having an argument. After interrogation, the police were surprised to discover that the woman named Ping was talking incoherently, clearly having mental problems. The man named Ling Yasheng kept avoiding the police's eyes, stuttering and unable to give a reason for the fight. Realizing that something was suspicious, the police kept asking questions, forcing Sheng to confess the truth. Xin said he was a disciple of Li Jiatuan, a 69-year-old man living in Tambi village, Nam Thin Town, Huachao City, Guangdong. In that house there were many women with mental illness like Bin. Based on the clues provided by Xin, the police raided Tone's house on the evening of July 6, 2003. The two-story brick house was surrounded by fish ponds, canals and dense gardens. The doors and windows were all welded with iron bars and fitted with locks. There were a few simple wooden beds in the house, but the mattresses on the beds were all high class. Besides, there were only a few broken rice bowls containing leftover food and a few plastic buckets filled with waste. In the room, 6 women with gaunt, emaciated faces were walking around naked, their feet chained. Seeing the police rush in, some squatted on the ground in a daze, some smiled strangely, waved their hands and muttered incomprehensible words. All were mental patients. While helping them get dressed, the police discovered that several of them had scars on their bodies from being beaten with bamboo sticks. The police then found the 7th female mental patient in a small wooden house on the hillside behind the house by the fish pond. She had been starved for 3 days. Sin said that the house by the fish pond was actually a brothel run by Mr. Toan. He not only forced the mental patients into prostitution to earn money for himself, but also raped them every day. To date, almost all the elderly, lonely and widowed men in the village are Mr. Tuan's customers. Many people from other places also come here to buy sex after hearing about it. The police immediately took Mr. Tone to the police station for interrogation. Knowing that he could not escape punishment, he confessed to the entire process of entering the path of crime. Lai Jia Tuan used to be a notorious thug in the locality. In 1971 he raped a woman and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. A few years after his release, Tuan was sentenced to 5 years in prison for theft. After being in and out of prison many times, his disappointed parents kicked Tuan out of the house, forcing him to find a way to make a living. Tuan saw others making a lot of money by digging ponds to raise fish, so he wanted to imitate them. But because he was lazy and had a bad reputation, Tuan's fish pond did not make any money, just enough to keep him from starving. By the age of 50, Tuan still could not get married. To satisfy his sexual desires, he came up with the depraved idea of kidnapping mentally ill women, wandering around squares, train stations and bus stations, locking them up and forcing them to have sex. Within a few days, Tone seduced and tricked several women and brought them home. To prevent them from running out and being discovered, he used chains to tie them up. These patients had no consciousness or ability to resist, so Tone's plan went smoothly. Not long after, Tone got bored and started looking for new prey. He targeted a good-looking mental patient who often wandered around the nearby train station. But the girl was kidnapped by the trafficker before Tuan could act. At that time, many human traffickers made money by selling female mental patients to remote villages in the mountains. This information made Tone think of imitating them. He asked around, contacted a local human trafficking group, and sold all the women in the house. After receiving the money, he bought some beautiful young women from the traffickers. Around the end of 1996, Tuan turned his house next to the fish pond into a brothel, forcing mental patients to sell sex to older men. To make it easier to receive customers, he numbered the patients, charging 3 to 5 yuan each time. After that, Tone built a small wooden house on the hillside behind the house as a place to receive customers from other villages. Tuan's crimes lasted for 7 years without anyone discovering them because his house was located in a remote location on the edge of the village. Normally, no one would come. The fish pond was surrounded by barbed wire fences, so even if someone was curious, it would be difficult for them to go in and investigate. The more frequent customers who came to buy sex the more secretive they were. Tuan also always kept 5 to 6 women detained at the same time, enough to control them. The women in Tuan's house were only guaranteed a minimum level of living. The small, dark room became a paradise under Tuan's control, but a hell for female mental patients. As the business grew, Tuan accepted a disciple named Lang A. Sin. He was a regular customer who came to buy sex, and seeing that Tuan was making a lot of money, he asked him to teach him. After receiving the teacher money from Sin, Tuan began teaching him how to kidnap, traffic people, and avoid detection. However, Sin thought that places like train stations and squares were easy to catch, so he looked for other channels to buy and sell people. He set his sights on a private mental hospital, which was actually a place where human trafficking was conducted secretly. Sin cooperated with the person in charge of this mental hospital, paid for female patients, forced them into prostitution or sold them. The mental hospital would fake information that the patients were still being treated. In 2003, Sin bought Bin from the mental hospital. Bin was young and beautiful, but her illness was very serious. She often had seizures and beat people, so the mental hospital sold her 4 times and all were returned. The hospital wanted to get rid of Bin as soon as possible, so they sold her to Sin for a very cheap price. However, on the way back, Bin's illness suddenly flared up, and she attacked Sin fiercely on the street. Passers-by called the police, leading to the crimes of Sin and Tuan being exposed. On April 21, 2004, the Wyoming City Intermediate Court prosecuted Lee Jiaquan and 17 people related to the case on charges of kidnapping, trafficking in women, and rape. Most of the defendants were elderly men in the village with an average age of 60. Lee Jiaquan stated that from 1999 to 2003, he kidnapped a total of 17 mentally ill women, but the total number of women he imprisoned was more than 50. The victims were held for 3 days to 8 months, and their ages ranged from 20 to 40. Some were sold to farmers living nearby to be wives and have children. Some had escaped from Tuan's house, but because their minds were not clear and the surrounding villages had Tuan's colleagues, they fell into another devil's den. Lee Jiaquan was sentenced to life in prison, while others were sentenced to 3 to 4 years in prison. But then Tuan was released on bail and returned to the house next to the fish pond because of his old age and heart disease. After the shocking secret in Lee Jiaquan's house was revealed, the people here were shocked. Some people revealed to the media that they had complained about Lee Jiaquan's suspicious behavior, but officials in the village and town did not care. Why can Lee Jiaquan easily capture so many female mental patients from outside to trade? It's because no one cares. Wandering mental patients are a vulnerable group and the government should strengthen supervision and management, said a local doctor.